The morning air had that familiar bite of late autumn, crisp and sharp against the cheeks, with low-lying fog curling through the sleepy streets of Alders Hollow. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's dog by name, where news traveled faster than fire, and where the silence of the woods was both comfort and threat. 13-year-old Emily Sutton clipped the leash onto Shadow's collar, her golden retriever already pawing at the door in anticipation. She wore her favorite hoodie, navy with the faded logo of her middle school team, and slipped on a pair of worn sneakers without tying the laces. Her mother, Julia, was upstairs folding laundry when she called out, "Just a short walk, okay? Stay near the edge of the woods." Emily called back, "Yeah, Mom," without really meaning it. Shadow tugged forward as soon as they were outside, his nose low to the ground, tail wagging like a flag in the breeze. Emily didn't mind. It was their ritual. Late afternoon walks near the woods behind Maple Drive, circling the tree line before looping back. The woods had always held a mystique for her. Her dad used to tell her stories about fairies and forest spirits that lived deep within the pines, before he left town for good. That day, something about the woods felt different, like they were watching her. But that didn't stop her from slipping off the trail, letting Shadow lead. By the time the sun had dipped behind the hills, Julia realized Emily hadn't returned. At first, she paced the kitchen, reasoning that maybe Emily had stopped by a neighbor's. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Then an hour. By the time she called the police, Julia's voice was trembling. Deputy Rob Thorne responded to the call, a man who'd known the Suttons since Emily was born. He arrived just after dark, his cruiser's headlights slicing through the fog as Julia stood in the driveway, phone clutched in her hands like a lifeline. She wasn't crying yet. That would come later. The search began that night, flashlights sweeping the edge of the woods, volunteers forming lines, Shadow's name echoing through the trees. But there was no sign of Emily. Not a shoe. Not a scrap of clothing. Not even the jingle of Shadow's collar. Only the trees, tall and still and eerily silent. Morning came with no answers. The sun illuminated the tired, hollow eyes of parents, neighbors, and classmates, all of them hoping for something, anything, to make sense of the disappearance. But the forest gave up nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. The search turned to flyers, social media posts, and TV reports. Emily's face smiled back from posters stapled to telephone poles and bulletin boards. Tips came in from nearby towns, false sightings, rumors, dead ends. And always the same question haunted every conversation: how could a girl and a dog simply vanish into the woods without a trace? Julia stopped sleeping. She stopped eating. She sat on the porch night after night, watching the woods, her gaze locked on that same trail Emily had taken. She swore she could hear Shadow's bark sometimes, deep and distant, like it came from beneath the ground. Eventually, the news cycle moved on. The posters began to curl at the edges. The town went back to normal, or at least pretended to. Kids were warned not to go near the woods alone. New locks were installed on doors. But no one talked about Emily. Not really. Then, 1 year later, on a cold October morning, something changed. Rhett Callahan was a seasoned hunter who lived on the outskirts of Alders Hollow. He was the kind of man who preferred solitude, who spoke more to animals than people. That morning, he flew his new thermal drone over the ridge west of town, looking for deer trails. The drone buzzed softly in the air, its thermal camera mapping the cold landscape below. He almost didn't notice it. Just a flicker of red in the sea of blue. Something warm, something alive, just at the edge of a ravine no one ever hiked. Rhett squinted at the tablet in his hand. The heat signature pulsed faintly, the shape human-sized, curled or crouched. And beside it, another shape. Lower to the ground. Like a dog. His hand froze over the controls. Rhett rewatched the thermal feed twice. Then a third time. It didn't make sense. That area was miles from any trail, impossible to reach without climbing gear, and long dismissed in the search for Emily. But the shapes were there, undeniably alive, giving off steady heat. By the time he landed the drone and called the sheriff, the footage had already spread through the small community like wildfire. Julia got the call just before noon. There was something in the woods again. And it was warm. The footage was grainy but undeniable. Rhett Callahan sat stiffly in the sheriff's office, his hands clasped tightly around a thermos of lukewarm coffee, the drone tablet propped up on the desk. Sheriff Hal Whitaker watched the thermal recording on loop, jaw tightening each time the two red heat signatures flickered into view. The sheriff had seen a lot in his 30 years in law enforcement: car wrecks, cabin fires, one murder that still haunted the town, but nothing like this. He ran a hand through his silver-specked beard and muttered, "If this is some prank, Rhett." "It's not," Rhett replied, low and resolute. "I flew it myself. Battery was full, cameras clean, no glitches. That thing, whoever it is out there." The sheriff leaned forward. "You're sure it wasn't a hunter? Or a deer?" Rhett zoomed in on the tablet, freezing the frame. "That's a human-shaped figure, Hal. And look here, right next to it. 4 legs, smaller. Dog-sized. They were side by side. Crouched, like they were hiding." Sheriff Whitaker stared at the screen for a long time. "And you said this was over Ridgemore Hollow?" "Just east of it. Near the gully where the rockslide happened last winter." That name made the sheriff flinch. Ridgemore Hollow was the same stretch of land that had stumped rescue teams for weeks. The cliffs were unstable, overgrown, and full of sudden drop-offs. No one went out there anymore. By nightfall, word had spread. It didn't matter that it was just a thermal image, or that it was in a part of the woods declared inaccessible, hope had returned. A flicker of it, fragile and electric. For the first time in a year, the town believed that maybe, just maybe, Emily Sutton was still alive. That night, the search started again. Sheriff Whitaker authorized a small team, 2 deputies, Rhett with his drone, and a forest ranger named Kelsey Wren. They hiked out at dawn, navigating the treacherous ridge with ropes and pulleys, calling Emily's name through the rustling trees. But the forest was silent. The drone was sent up again, combing the area. Nothing. The heat signatures were gone. Still, Julia Sutton was there at the sheriff's office every day, asking questions, demanding updates. The brief, burning hope in her eyes was terrifying. It made people uncomfortable, like they were standing too close to something that might explode. By the 3rd day, the town began to fray. Rumors crept into grocery aisles and school hallways. "I heard the girl never left the woods. My cousin says someone saw lights out there last month. Blue ones. What if it wasn't Emily at all?" At Alder Hollow Middle School, lockers were suddenly covered in Emily's photo again. Teachers paused in the middle of lessons. The students whispered about ghost stories come to life. One girl claimed she dreamed of Emily walking barefoot down Maple Drive, her hair covered in leaves, her eyes all wrong. That kind of talk spread faster than the truth. Rhett, meanwhile, became an unlikely celebrity. Reporters started calling, and he refused every interview. He had uploaded the footage anonymously at first, just enough to alert the sheriff, but someone had leaked it. It was already making the rounds online. Drone captures mysterious heat signature in forest where teen vanished a year ago. Tens of thousands of views. Theories piled up in the comments. Sasquatch. Feral child. Military cover-up. Shadow people. Sheriff Whitaker shut all that down publicly, calling for privacy and respect, but the damage was done. Now the whole state was looking at Alder's Hollow, digging into a wound that never healed. Meanwhile, Julia's house became a shrine again. Candles on the porch. Stuffed animals on the swing. Someone left a note, "Come home, Emily. Please." On the 6th day after the drone sighting, the sheriff called off the renewed search. He couldn't risk people getting hurt chasing ghosts through a collapsing ravine. Rhett argued, begged, even offered to go out alone. Sheriff Whitaker refused. But Julia didn't stop. She started going out into the woods herself, armed with nothing but a flashlight, a whistle, and Emily's old blanket. Every evening, she walked as far as she could toward the ridge before turning back. She kept Shadow's leash looped around her wrist like a lifeline, whispering her daughter's name through the trees. Then, exactly 1 week after the thermal drone sighting, something unexpected happened. Shadow returned. At first, Julia thought she was hallucinating. She opened the back door to take out trash and there he was, mud-caked, gaunt, eyes wild, but unmistakably him. Her dog. Emily's dog. He stood there panting, tail low, ears back, whining softly. She dropped the garbage bag and fell to her knees. Shadow. He lunged forward and collapsed into her arms, trembling, burying his head into her chest like a child. Tears streamed down Julia's face. But Shadow wasn't just dirty, he was wounded. A gash along his shoulder, deep and fresh. Old scars lined his haunches, some that looked like bites. And around his neck, beneath the matted fur, something odd, a small woven cord. Twine or rope, hand-braided. It wasn't there when he vanished. Shadow had been somewhere. With someone. Julia whispered, "Where's Emily?" But Shadow only whimpered, staring toward the woods, eyes wide with something like fear. By dawn the next morning, word about Shadow's return had already reached every corner of Alder's Hollow. Cars slowed in front of Julia's house, curious faces pressed to windows, kids pointing from back seats. The porch was cluttered again, flowers, candles, scrawled notes. All the things people did when they didn't know what else to do. But Julia had no time for small talk or sympathy. She was focused on one thing, following whatever trail Shadow might have brought back with him. She stood in the kitchen with Sheriff Whitaker and Rhett Callahan, Shadow lying nearby on a blanket, his bandaged shoulder rising and falling with slow, even breaths. His golden fur had been trimmed back where necessary, cleaned of blood and burrs. The cord around his neck was now coiled neatly on the kitchen table, a makeshift braid of dried vines, thin twigs, and something fibrous no one could quite identify. "It's handmade," Rhett said, tapping the cord with the edge of a pencil. "Primitive, but deliberate." "Could it be hers?" Julia asked. Sheriff Whitaker frowned. "We don't know. Could be something he got tangled in out there. Could be some survivalist nonsense. This doesn't prove she's alive." "She is," Julia said sharply. "He came back. He came from her." They all turned to look at the dog. Shadow stirred but didn't rise. Instead, he let out a low whine and pressed his muzzle to Julia's shoe. Rhett stepped forward, crouching. "Let me take him out. Just a short walk. If there's any scent trail, any direction he wants to pull toward." "I'm going with you," Julia said. It didn't matter how dangerous it was. Or how little chance there was of a trail after a year. She was going. They set out that afternoon, skirting the edge of Ridgemoor Hollow. The sun hovered low and pale in the sky, its warmth unable to cut the chill that had settled over the forest. Frost clung to fallen leaves like silver dust, crunching beneath their boots. Shadow was alert, head high, ears twitching at every sound. At first, he led them confidently through the thickets behind Maple Drive, toward a clearing where Emily used to play when she was younger. But then, unexpectedly, he froze. He sniffed the air, growled low in his throat, and changed direction sharply, heading toward the ridge. "No, no, no," Sheriff Whitaker muttered, following behind them with 2 deputies in tow. "That's unstable ground, we're not going further than the boundary." But Shadow didn't stop. He wove through brush and logs like he'd memorized the terrain, slowing only to check his surroundings. Julia clutched the leash tightly, stumbling as roots snagged her shoes. The group reached a split in the trees, a small gap in the ridge where a narrow path descended into a rocky slope. No one had searched this specific crevice before. It was just narrow enough to miss on satellite maps, just steep enough to scare away any volunteers. Shadow stopped at the edge and stared down. "There," Julia whispered. "That's where he came from." Rhett was already pulling out the drone. "Let's get eyes on it from above before anyone goes in." He launched it into the sky, the whir of rotors echoing through the trees. The thermal camera flickered on, scanning the slope, slowly tilting and zooming. At first, nothing. Cold blue across the ravine. Then. There. Rhett pointed. A smudge of red. Small. Faint. Everyone clustered around the screen. Julia's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't clear. Not a body. But it was something. Warmth nestled against the side of a rock outcrop, half covered by debris or leaves. And nearby, another faint line, curving across the slope like something had been dragged. Sheriff Whitaker looked visibly shaken. "We need a climbing team. And lighting. This terrain is too risky to go into now. We'll plan a proper descent tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Julia snapped. "What if she's hurt? What if she could be gone by then?" Rhett added. "Or worse." But the sheriff was firm. "We're not sending people into a rockslide waiting to happen. We do this right." Frustrated, Julia sank to her knees beside Shadow, gripping the leash like a lifeline. The dog licked her hand and rested his head against her leg. They waited there until sundown. That night, Julia didn't sleep. She sat with Shadow curled at her side, the glow of the drone footage on repeat across her laptop screen. Every flicker of heat was scrutinized, every rustle in the background rewound and slowed down. But what haunted her wasn't the shape itself, it was what surrounded it. There were patterns in the way the foliage was disturbed. A ring of flattened grass and broken twigs. An outline. Like something had been living there. Or waiting. Just after midnight, Julia's phone buzzed. It was a private number. No caller ID. She answered. There was silence for several seconds. Then a sound, barely audible. Not static. Not a voice. A bark. Faint. Muffled. Familiar. Then the line went dead. Julia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She looked down. Shadow was already on his feet, ears perked, body tense. Staring at the door. He had heard it too. Morning came with thin sunlight stretching across the rooftops of Alder's Hollow, but Julia barely noticed. Her hands trembled as she fed Shadow, eyes flicking constantly toward the door. The sound she'd heard on the phone. Short, sharp, unmistakably a bark, played over and over in her mind like a broken record. It hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been a mistake. And the way Shadow had reacted, confirmed it. Someone, or something, wanted her attention. At 7 a.m. sharp, Sheriff Whitaker arrived at her door with Rhett, Kelsey Wren the ranger, and 3 climbers from the county's emergency response team. Gear loaded into trucks, helmets glinting in the morning sun. No more delays. Today, they would descend into the ravine. Julia insisted on going. The sheriff initially refused, citing liability, risk, and protocol. But Julia Sutton had no interest in rules anymore. She signed the waiver without blinking and stood beside Rhett as the group set off toward the ridge. Shadow stayed close to her side, unusually quiet but alert, watching the trees. The hike to the descent point took nearly 2 hours. As they reached the ledge overlooking the narrow gulch, Rhett launched the drone again, sweeping over the area with both standard and thermal cameras. The shape from the previous day was gone, but the disturbed terrain remained. A hollow in the brush. flattened moss. Scattered bones, animal, likely deer. But one item chilled everyone on the ridge, a pink shoelace, frayed and crusted with dirt, snagged on a branch. Julia clutched it to her chest. These are hers. The climbing team set their ropes and began the descent. Julia, geared up and harnessed, waited impatiently at the rear. The ravine was tighter than it looked from above, craggy outcrops jutted from the walls like jagged teeth. With every step downward, the air grew cooler, more still. No birdsong. No rustling leaves. It was like the forest held its breath. When they reached the bottom, the scent hit them first. Not rot. Not death. Something else, earthy and stale, like water trapped underground too long. The space was shadowed and uneven, bordered by thick growth and stone walls slick with moss. And then they saw it. A small lean-to structure made of sticks, leaves, and dried grass. Not random debris. Deliberate. Crafted. Inside, nestled in the shadows, were remnants, a blanket, half-rotted but still showing the faded image of cartoon animals. A metal bowl with rusted edges. Empty snack wrappers. A child's drawing half buried beneath the leaves. Sheriff Whitaker crouched beside it. She was here. Rhett moved to the edge of a nearby outcrop. Julia, come look at this. A few yards beyond the shelter was a narrow opening between two boulders, a jagged crack in the earth. Rhett shined his flashlight inside. The beam disappeared into what looked like a tunnel, narrow, sloping downward. Ranger Wren examined the opening. This isn't natural. It was widened. Dug out over time. Julia peered in. Her voice was almost a whisper. Like something lives in there. They couldn't go in, not yet. The passage was too tight and unstable. A remote crawler camera was requested, but it would take a day to arrive. In the meantime, the team marked the site and left sensors to detect movement or heat. The area was secured. That evening, back in her home, Julia examined the items retrieved from the shelter. The drawing caught her eye first. Crude crayon lines on torn paper, two figures holding hands, a dog beside them. One figure was noticeably taller. Hair long and black. The second figure had no hair, just a round head and big eyes, completely filled in with dark ink. Above them, a sun. But it wasn't yellow. It was red. In the corner, a small word had been written in careful, shaky print. Home. Julia turned it over, heart racing. The back had one more word, scrawled in the same childlike handwriting. Soon. That night, she locked the doors, sat with Shadow curled beside her, and waited. She didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., Shadow growled low in his throat. Not at the window. At the fireplace. The old one sealed up years ago. Julia turned toward it slowly, heart pounding. She heard it too, barely a sound. A scrape. A faint tap. Then silence. The next morning, the sheriff called. One of the sensors at the ravine had triggered during the night. Something, or someone, had emerged from the tunnel. And whatever it was, it had walked on 2 feet. By sunrise, the ravine was crawling with personnel. Sheriff Whitaker had ordered the area cordoned off, and yellow tape stretched between trees like cautionary spiderwebs. Julia stood just beyond the line, arms folded, Shadow pressed tightly to her leg. Her eyes were locked on the tunnel entrance at the base of the slope, silent and dark. The motion sensor had been tripped just after 3:08 a.m. The camera mounted nearby had been malfunctioning, fried, actually, as though it had overheated or short-circuited. The techs blamed it on faulty wiring. But to Julia, it was a warning. Sheriff Whitaker approached her, visibly tired, holding a thermos he hadn't sipped from. We're not going into the tunnel until the crawler arrives. Julia didn't argue. She simply asked, did you find tracks? Yeah. Just one set. Human. Barefoot. The implications hung between them. Who, or what, had walked out of that tunnel in the dead of night? The crawler arrived just after noon. A small, tank-like robot equipped with a camera, floodlight, and sensor array. It rolled down the ravine slope with surprising ease, navigated to the mouth of the tunnel, and crept inside, its footage live-streamed to a portable monitor nearby. The screen flickered, then resolved into dim, gray stone walls. The passage sloped downward quickly. The floor was uneven, damp, with strange symbols drawn in the dirt, spirals, crosses, and oddly geometric patterns. Kelsey Wren squinted at the screen. Those aren't random. Someone drew them. Repeatedly. As the crawler moved deeper, the air on screen became misty, the lens fogging slightly. The passage grew tighter and more winding. Just as it seemed the crawler might get stuck, it emerged into a larger chamber. Everyone gathered around the monitor, breaths held. The crawler's light cut through the gloom, revealing walls covered in scratches and symbols. But the focus was the far wall. A large, flat stone slab lay propped against it. Like a door. And then the light caught something else. A set of handprints on the stone. Small. Child-sized. Pressed there recently. Julia stepped back from the monitor, her mouth dry. She's in there. The sheriff gave a cautious nod. Or she was. We don't know where she is now. Then we find her. But the drone couldn't go beyond the slab. And with the passage being so narrow, sending a person in without proper ventilation or backup could be fatal. The plan shifted to extraction. They would return the next morning with tools to breach the slab and safely explore the chamber beyond. That night, Julia returned home under escort. But rest was impossible. Shadow paced constantly, whining at the back door. Julia let him out into the yard, watching from the kitchen window. He stood by the tree line, tense, tail low, ears perked. Then he barked, once. Loud and sharp. Julia stepped out, flashlight in hand. Shadow. He turned and looked at her, eyes glowing slightly in the light. Then, without warning, he bolted. Shadow. She ran after him, the cold biting at her lungs, stumbling through the thicket at the edge of the woods. Shadow moved like he'd seen a ghost, darting through brush, across the old creek bed, past the abandoned fence behind the elementary school. Julia followed, legs burning, breath rasping. Then she stopped cold. In the clearing ahead, Shadow stood still, tail lowered, gaze fixed on a dark figure just beyond the trees. It was a girl. Barefoot. Mud-caked. Hair hanging in tangled sheets around her face. Thin. Pale. Unmoving. Emily. Julia's voice cracked. The girl tilted her head. Julia stepped forward. Emily, it's me. It's Mom. The girl didn't move. Please, come to me. Please. A low sound issued from behind the girl. Not quite a growl. Not quite a voice. Something else. It made Julia's skin crawl. The girl's head jerked toward the sound but made no move to run. Then, like a flicker, the figure turned and disappeared into the woods. Shadow barked and ran after her. No. Shadow, come back. Julia chased them through brambles and fog, branches clawing her arms and legs. But the forest was too dense. Too fast. She finally stopped, heart pounding, breath ragged, surrounded by darkness and silence. She screamed her daughter's name until her voice broke. But the woods had swallowed them again. Julia stumbled home near dawn, scratches on her arms, blood on her hands, and Shadow nowhere to be found. Again. When she arrived, there was a package on her porch. No note. No return address. Inside was a bundle of cloth, one of Emily's old shirts, and wrapped inside it, something smooth and round. A stone. Carved with the same spiral from the tunnel. It was still warm. The spiral carved into the stone was rough and shallow, but unmistakable. Julia traced it with her fingers, the texture unnervingly smooth in places, worn down from being held, maybe even clutched. It was about the size of a grapefruit, too large to carry easily in a pocket, too heavy to be left behind by a child. But someone had brought it to her doorstep. And it was still warm. Red arrived before sunrise. Julia had called him, not the sheriff. She didn't trust the delay that came with bureaucracy anymore. Red showed up in flannel and boots, a rifle slung across his back, his drone gear packed tight in a black case. "Where did it happen?" he asked immediately. Julia led him behind the house, to the clearing where she'd last seen Shadow and the barefoot girl she knew, was Emily. Red examined the ground in the gray morning light, crouching low, brushing leaves aside with practiced fingers. He found prints almost instantly. Dog tracks. Fresh. Running. He paused, then shifted to another pattern. And here, bare feet. Small. Light pressure. She wasn't limping. He rose and looked at Julia. "She's surviving out there." Julia held out the stone. "This was on my porch when I got home." Rhett took it carefully, turning it over. Spiral. Same as the tunnel. "You believe me now?" "I believed you when Shadow came back." He looked toward the tree line. "Let's go find her." They hiked toward the ravine again, cutting a new path closer to where Julia saw the girl. Rhett flew his thermal drone high above, the screen strapped to his forearm. The cold air gave everything a bluish hue, and the forest below looked like veins on a frozen body, intertwined and endless. "There," he muttered. "Movement. Northwest. Half a mile." Julia craned over his shoulder. A heat signature flickered in the canopy. Faint but definite. Human-shaped. Still. Then it moved, quickly. Darting from one tree to the next. "She's watching us," Rhett said. "Staying ahead. Testing if we'll follow." "Then let's follow." They moved fast, ducking through tangled underbrush, down an old logging trail long since overgrown. The signal on the drone bounced, fluctuating between glimpses of red and long gaps of blue. Then it stopped. "Lost her," Rhett said. "She's either hiding, or she went underground again." Julia stared ahead. There was something different about the woods here. The trees grew denser, older. Moss thickened around their trunks, and long strands hung from branches like curtains. It was quieter, too, unnaturally so. Then Rhett stopped short. In the distance, nestled in a patch of fog, stood a structure. At first glance, it looked like a cabin, but as they got closer, it became clear it wasn't meant for living. It was too narrow. Too long. No windows. Its wood was soaked through with time and rot. "Wasn't on any of the maps," Rhett whispered. "Is that blood?" Julia pointed to the frame of the warped door, long streaks of brown, dried and flaked. Rhett raised his rifle. "Stay behind me." He pushed the door open slowly. It creaked on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick with mold and something more ancient, something foul. The beam from his flashlight swept across the room. Bones littered the corners. Mostly animals. But some too large. Too human. Julia stepped in despite his protests. The walls were covered in carvings. Spirals. Crosses. Eyes. And words. Scrawled over and over in crude, shaking handwriting. "It lives below." In the center of the floor was a pit. Not a dug hole, but a perfect circle, black, smooth-edged, like it had always been there. Julia knelt beside it. Emily's down there. She has to be. Rhett leaned in, listening. Do you hear that? It was faint, so faint Julia thought she imagined it, a humming. A pulse. Like something breathing from the earth. They didn't go further. Rhett marked the coordinates and uploaded the thermal data. They would regroup and return with equipment. As they hiked back toward town, something followed them. They could feel it. Hear it. Shifting softly between trees, always just out of view. Once, Rhett turned quickly and raised his rifle, but there was nothing. No animals. No birds. Not even wind. When they reached the road, the forest felt like it exhaled behind them. Julia didn't speak until they were back in the car. She's not alone in those woods, she said. Rhett didn't answer. Later that night, Julia sat on her porch, staring at the stone again. The spiral shimmered faintly in the porch light. She held it close. Shadow hadn't returned. But at 2:17 a.m., the motion lights outside her kitchen flicked on. She grabbed her flashlight and raced to the back door. There, just at the edge of the woods, stood Emily. This time, there was no fog. No darkness to hide behind. Her face was dirty, gaunt, but hers. She was staring at Julia. And she was smiling. Julia ran toward her, crying, calling out, but as she crossed the yard, the light above flickered and buzzed. And Emily vanished into the trees again. But on the ground where she had stood, was Shadow's leash. Clean. Untangled. Coiled like someone had placed it there on purpose. Attached was a piece of bark. And carved into it. Not yet. The footage was grainy, unsteady, exactly what you'd expect from a motion-activated trail camera hastily mounted on a tree near Julia's backyard. Rhett had placed it there after the last encounter, with Julia's permission and a quiet understanding between them. They were beyond conventional methods now. They were trying to document a ghost. And then the impossible happened. At exactly 2:16 a.m., the camera flicked on. For the first few seconds, it caught nothing but rustling leaves. Then, movement. The edge of a figure slipping between two birch trees. The camera adjusted its focus automatically. Emily. She stepped into the clearing slowly, barefoot, her shirt torn and stained, hair hanging in matted ropes around her face. But what truly froze Julia's breath in her lungs wasn't the way Emily looked. It was how she moved. She didn't sway or stumble. She stood perfectly upright, head tilting in short, mechanical motions. Her eyes glowed faintly, caught in the infrared light, but the expression behind them, it wasn't vacant. It wasn't confused. It was deliberate. Emily stepped toward the camera. Close. Closer. Then she stopped, no more than 4 feet away, her face full in frame. Her lips moved, but there was no audio. Her mouth formed words, slow and careful. Rhett played it back a dozen times, studying her lips, scribbling notes. He didn't speak until the 12th replay. She's saying, "Don't follow." Julia stared at the screen, heart pounding. Don't follow what? I don't know. But she's warning us. He paused the video on her final frame. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Then the camera glitched, the image breaking into static before abruptly cutting off. That's not a malfunction, Rhett said. Something killed the feed. They went outside and found the camera. Ripped clean off the tree. Not broken. Removed. The strap had been unfastened. No scratch marks. No signs of struggle. It was like someone had untied it, gently. But the real horror came later. Rhett had transferred the footage to his laptop for further analysis. He ran a thermal analysis filter over the recording, just in case there was something else the naked eye missed. There was. As Emily approached the camera, another figure was visible behind her, only for a single frame. It stood deeper in the woods. Tall. Thin. Too tall. And not human. Its body gave off no heat signature. It was colder than the air around it. A void. The sheriff convened a small meeting in his office the next morning. Just Julia, Rhett, Kelsey, and 2 trusted deputies. The footage was reviewed in silence, frame by terrifying frame. Kelsey leaned forward, voice low. What if Emily wasn't surviving out there, alone? She's being kept, Julia said. Used. Manipulated. That thing behind her. She's not afraid of it. She's protecting us from it. Rhett nodded slowly. Or she thinks she is. The sheriff exhaled deeply. We're officially in territory I don't know how to handle. I can't put out an APB for a shadow entity. I can't call in state police and tell them we have a living ghost warning us off a cave. So we keep it contained, Rhett said. We get back to that tunnel. We go in. The sheriff grimaced. We wait for clearance. And backup. But Julia had already decided. Waiting hadn't brought Emily home. Waiting hadn't saved anyone. That night, under the cover of darkness, Julia packed a bag, flashlight, rope, water, and the stone with the spiral. She tucked it into a side pouch. It felt heavier now. She called Rhett. We go tonight. Rhett didn't hesitate. I'll meet you at the trailhead. The woods were impossibly still. Rhett and Julia made it to the ravine without incident. This time, they had no drone, no tech team. Just themselves, headlamps, and instinct. The moon was thin above them, casting little light, but enough to see where the trees parted. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, black as pitch. The stone slab inside had been breached earlier that day by county workers, cleared but never entered. Now, they stood at its threshold. Julia turned on her headlamp and ducked inside. The tunnel was tighter than she remembered. The spirals carved on the walls seemed deeper now, as though fresh hands had etched over them again and again. Rhett followed closely, rifle strapped tight across his back, scanning the walls. The air grew colder as they descended. Then the tunnel opened into the chamber beyond the slab. It was enormous. Larger than expected. A domed cavern with dripping stalactites and glimmering patches of mineral deposits. Bones littered the far edges, deer, raccoon, foxes, and others. Not animals. In the center of the room sat a circle of stones. And in the middle of it, something wrapped in a blanket. A figure. Julia rushed forward before Rhett could stop her, dropping to her knees. It was Emily. Or someone who looked like her. The girl was curled up, arms around her knees, eyes closed. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale and waxy. But she was breathing. Shallow, slow, alive. Emily, Julia whispered, choking on tears. Emily, baby, I'm here. The girl stirred, eyes fluttering open. They were wrong. Too wide. The whites too bright. Mom, she said weakly. Julia sobbed. Yes, yes, I'm here. I've got you. Emily sat up slowly, her hands trembling. We have to go. Now. Before it knows you're here. Rhett scanned the chamber. What is it, Emily? What's been keeping you? Emily looked past him. Not what? Where? A sound echoed behind them. Not a growl. Not a whisper. Something between. The tunnel behind them began to close, not physically, but with a shifting, living darkness. Like smoke crawling inward. Like the walls themselves were breathing. Rhett turned, rifle raised. Time to move. Emily clung to her mother, whispering something over and over. Julia leaned close, trying to hear. The girl's voice cracked, barely audible. It dreams. It hears. It remembers. They ran. They burst from the tunnel mouth into the freezing night, stumbling over rocks and roots, adrenaline carrying them faster than their legs should have allowed. Emily clung to Julia, whispering fragmented warnings as the forest pulsed with a thick silence, as though the trees were holding their breath, listening for footsteps. Rhett turned back only once. Just long enough to see the blackness from the tunnel writhing and retreating, not like smoke, but like something living, curling back into the cave's throat. Whatever it wasn't following. Not yet. They reached the ridgeline just before dawn. Emily collapsed into the grass at the edge of the slope, breathing hard, face pale and slick with cold sweat. Julia wrapped her in her coat and cradled her close, rocking her as if time might undo what a year in the forest had done. "We have to get her to a hospital," Rhett said, already fumbling with the satellite phone. "No hospitals," Emily said suddenly, eyes snapping open. Julia froze. "Sweetheart, you need help. You're not well." "I can't go into the lights," Emily said, her voice flat, almost robotic. "It sees through light. It waits for light. It feeds from it." Rhett raised a brow. "What does that mean?" Emily turned to him. "You woke it. When you flew the drone. You looked into the place it sleeps." Silence fell over the ridge. "I thought it let me go," she whispered. "But it just wanted me to bring someone else back." Julia's heart hammered in her chest. "What is it, Emily?" The girl didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the trees below. Not afraid, anticipating. Rhett helped them down the slope slowly, careful to avoid the broken earth. When they reached the main trail, Julia called the sheriff. No more secrets. No more waiting. An ambulance met them just outside the forest boundary, but Emily refused to enter. They had to sedate her lightly just to coax her into the back. She screamed the whole way to the county hospital, clawing at the windows, crying out one name over and over. Shadow. Doctors were baffled. Emily was malnourished but not critically. She had injuries, old fractures that had healed imperfectly, dozens of scars, but no major infections. Her blood work showed strange anomalies in cortisol levels, immune markers, and a deficiency in light exposure. It was as if she hadn't been living in the forest, but under it. She barely spoke. When she did, it was fragmented. Phrases. Sometimes questions. Do the trees still sing at night? Is the creek still dry? Do the shadows know you yet? The psychologist called it trauma-induced dissociation. Julia knew better.